Thank you all for joining. Thank you for coming to create AI-powered API documentation fast. I think it's going to be a fascinating session. I'm Emmanuel Paraskakis. I'm an API product manager and have been for a while, have been building tools for people that build APIs and specifically some documentation tools. So this is very near and dear to me. And, we did some good tooling in the past, including the Swagger toolset that I worked on, but I'm very excited about the new capabilities of the new third generation, let's say, API documentation tools that are out there. And one of the tools I really like is Theneo. And I'm very excited to have Ana Robakidze, the founder and CEO of Theneo here. Ana, you want to introduce yourself? Tell us about why you started Theneo.
Well, first of all, hello everyone. Very excited to be here and talking about APIs and API documentation. So my background is in engineering. So I used to work as head of engineering, dealing with lots of APIs. And I hated the way we were dealing with API docs. I saw the impact it had on the company, on integrations, on API adoption, sometimes even on revenue. But the way we worked was not the best way. This was pre-ChatGPT days. So we created our own language model and we decided to automate it. So that's how we got started. Today, the way Theneo looks, the way we build a product is very different from our original thought of just having for engineers. Now our product is for everyone, from product managers to engineers to even salespeople. Now today get involved with APIs because the impact API documentation, because the impact it has on API adoption and then on revenue.
Yeah. And API documentation and dev portals used to take, I don't know, entire sprints or months or days or whatever. So I think that's going to be the big surprise and differentiator here, how quick it is to get started. And a lot of it is due to AI. I do want you all on the call to get hands-on with this. So if you'd like, you can sign up for Theneo on theneo.io. It's free. Let me put the link here in the chat for everyone. Shouldn't take too long to sign up, but you can also just sit back and watch. And then the other thing is we're going to use some OpenAPI files in this kind of hands-on demo. Now, if you have your own API file, OpenAPI file, bring it, use it, and generate your own documentation. If you don't, here's a couple of samples. I'll put both links in. I think, Ana, you're going to use the first link, right? The bad spec. Why is that?
Well, I want you to get an idea of the real life use cases. I wish I could say that our users import this perfectly generated API spec. When you ask engineers to generate real API from production, it's not going to be nice. So I wanted to walk you through the real life example. This is an actual one of the mimic of real client API spec that I have just changed things around and removed any sensitive information. But this is, you'll see if you import in different platforms, it generates a lot of errors because, well, that API spec is faulty. But I wanted you to have that experience of how we use that bad API spec and generate into that good quality API documentation.
Okay. Yeah. So I looked at that spec. Let me show you a peek, and it's full of errors. So we'll talk about why that is, and what usually happens. I also have a link to a kind of very simple known goods API for people who want to try the happy path. But I think the way we should do this is have people sign up on Theneo, and then maybe they can grab their own OpenAPI or the bad OpenAPI and follow along as you show us how to do things. So people on the call, just give me a thumbs up as an emoji in the chat when you have all of this done, sign up and got the file. The file is going to live in a GitHub repo. That's where the link points to. All right. Ferris has thumb up. Anybody else? Okay, I'll let you work on that. Let me just tell you what we're going to do the next maybe 40 minutes or so. So first of all, we're going to talk about what documentation with OpenAPI is and why you should use it. Then we're going to get hands-on. Anna's going to show us how to generate documentation on Theneo, and then she's going to show how to use AI to really enhance and flesh out documentation quickly. And finally, we're going to go through a brief action plan of what you can do, how you can learn more, where do you go to become more knowledgeable about this topic, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A, at least 10 minutes at the end for you to basically put questions to Anna. All right, so OpenAPI. If you haven't heard of it, it basically sits at the center of every API delivery lifecycle, at least for so-called REST APIs, for HTTP APIs. What it is a domain-specific, a language to document and talk about how APIs should behave. And the reason we put it at the center of this API lifecycle is because it guides everything. It helps you ideate, it helps you design the API, even prototype the API, go out to customers and ask them, what do you think about my API? Can you give me some feedback so I can incorporate it back into the spec and then come back to you? And then it also helps with development, configuration, and rollout of the API, but also importantly, with documentation. So it is the scaffolding around which we build documentation. And if you haven't seen OpenAPI, it looks kind of like this. It looks a little bit like code. The file itself has certain sections in it where there is a first section that has metadata. For example, it talks about the name of the API. There's another section that talks about where the API lives, and a section that talks about security. And then finally, a section that talks about the actual workings of the API, the paths, the methods, the requests, the responses, and all the things that go into an API. OpenAPI is the most widely used API description format, and it is governed by the OpenAPI initiative under the Linux Foundation. So that's where you would go learn more about it. You'll have the links in the slides that I will send out after this call. Couple of things about good documentation. We've all heard and seen the Stripe documentation that is put up as the prototypical good API documentation. Why is it good? Well, it includes everything that people need to get going. It has a navigation pane that scrolls independently of anything else. It has a lot of text description for humans. You can go read about how the API works. But it also has built-in requests that you can use and access directly. And also examples of responses. So you can see what comes back. But you can also copy that response and start playing around with it and put it in your code, perhaps. So the reason API documentation is important is because without documentation, your API is unusable. People don't know what it does, and your documentation has to be accurate. One of the worst problems you can have is your documentation doesn't match what's implemented in the API. And kind of the second worst problem is where your documentation is very sparse and it doesn't explain what the API does. So we'll see in the demo how that can really be helped with AI. All right, so just really quickly, if you're doing documentation, you're probably following this four-step process. First of all, you're probably starting with OpenAPI. Maybe your team, your delivery team has an OpenAPI file. Maybe it's getting generated. Maybe you write it by hand, more rarely. Maybe it's generated by a LLM. I've done some lessons in the past about that. But eventually, somebody that is going to add text to it comes in and adds descriptions on top of it. And then finally, you will render it using tooling as documentation from OpenAPI, and then you'll publish it to a dev portal, and then people can hopefully comment on it, tell you if it's good or bad, give you feedback, and you will iterate and continue to do that. So this is great, and this is awesome if you have a large team and all the time in the world. But sometimes, as product managers, we get asked to do more. And the scenario that we're going to follow here today is, what if you're the only API product manager? And what if you have some open API and you maybe used it as a prototype, or maybe your team gave you the open API, but engineers are busy building a backend service, and your tech writers are fighting another fire, they're doing something else, but you need to get out some documentation for some customers to take a look at. And you also have front-end developers that will be building in parallel, whether they're external or internal to your organization, and they really want to know what the API is going to do. So how do you get a first iteration of API documentation out there to use it as primarily for feedback to improve? And how do you do that as a product manager? So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off to Ana so she can show us. And I hope that you can follow along and actually generate the documentation yourselves. All
Great
right.
introduction. This was great. And like it was mentioned, if you generate OpenAPI spec yourself from scratch, using AI itself, it might be very nice. You might have all the descriptions, you might have, perfectly structured. But if you were to ask your engineers to generate an OpenAPI spec from your production, I can guarantee you it will not be nice. I wish that I said that most of the users upload a perfect API, but that's not the case. That's why today I have chosen that specific API spec so I can walk you through the real use case. So I hope you can see my screen. Okay, great. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna create API doc based on the bed API spec that I have shared with you. So I'm gonna upload this. And you'll see that here, the second option that I have is different AI options, which we can help you with generating the content and making the documentation better. But in this case, I'm not going to generate anything because I want you to see how this looks like without any interaction whatsoever. So let's go to preview. And we can just publish this and have a look at the documentation and what's at fault here. So as you can see, most of the sections here do not have any descriptions. They don't, the fields itself, body parameters, responses, nothing has descriptions. Some of the sections might have a little bit of description, but most of them just don't have any descriptions whatsoever. So nothing available here. Also, I can see, for example, there are different type of IDs. A lot of times ID fields, not always, but a lot of times they're a required field, but none of that is actually indicated in OpenAPI spec. So this doesn't look as nice as your Stripe-like API documentation. So let's try and improve this. And first, let's start with AI. So I'm going to create a new version of this documentation. Better API spec, API doc. So let's upload exactly same API spec. And this time I'm going to use AI. And let's go ahead and generate it. And I don't know if you saw earlier, there are different options that are available for me. There is a partial documentation generation. So that means that, let's say, if all other fields and everything else is generated correctly, I can use that option. But with full AI generation, we'll completely rewrite the documentation and just create a new version. Just because I know that this API spec is not great, I'll just use the full AI assistant. So let's now compare this level of documentation to the one that we have that doesn't have AI whatsoever. Now in this version, as you can see, all the sections from the section summary to the section itself where the requests are, all the fields have all the descriptions that I need to have. Why is this important? Why do you need to have description? For example, in Theneo, we have this Ask AI feature so that users can interact and ask questions like they would with ChatGPT. If the fields do not have description, AI responses are not going to be accurate. Or let's say I'm trying out the API and I might have questions, but if I hover over and I don't have these field descriptions, I might not know what it is. And I will not make good decisions on how I can first interact with your API. if you're exposing your API to public, this type of user interaction makes a huge difference. You want to make sure that your API is actually adopted. And one of the first things that you want to concentrate is how they can make those first API calls successfully. So while this looks much better than the first version that we had, so it's much better experience, it's still not that Stripe-like or that good quality documentation that
Anna, before you go on,
Yep.
I have to ask, where are these descriptions coming from? You mentioned AI, but is this kind of your own trained model? How is this being generated?
Good question. So while initially we started off with our own language model, we switched to OpenAI. It was probably like 6, 7 months ago. Reason why we have done it is because OpenAI outperforms us in terms of AI functionality, obviously. But the way we are generating this content in terms of the algorithm is still stayed to our original structure. There are a lot of different things we take into consideration from different fields, from the parent fields to the section name to other API endpoints. We try to get as much as information so the description stays as accurate as possible. It doesn't mean that humans or technical writers might not need to interact. We still recommend that humans actually review these and see if descriptions are accurate. But a lot of times, in terms of percentage of how many users end up using what we generate, it's usually very high.
But I can obviously go in and modify this. I can use it as a starting point, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I'm going to go to now is while this is not bad, right? They generated a lot of things for me. You still want to adjust this and create that better quality documentation. And that's where I would say that human involvement makes it much better, right? So I have all this, I would say 90% of work done, but now I'm going to add additional context. So that's where our web editor comes in. And this is designed for anyone from product managers to engineers to collaborate together. You can, like in Figma, Google Doc, you can add each other and you can see how you're making the changes. So I'm going to create now a getting started page because while I have all these endpoints, I'm not telling users what I have available, how they can get started, error codes, status codes, and all these things. So I'm manually going to create that introduction page. I'm going to add also page about errors, status. Let me move this up in the beginning. I'm going to convert this as a header. I'm going to add base URL information as well as language box. So we have this thing where we automatically convert all of your requests into multiple programming languages so that developers that are interacting, they can always switch to whatever they are interested in. And obviously you can add introduction here. You can add things like maybe card groups or grids, etc., to maybe highlight campaign, contacts, and all these different sections that we have. Then here in errors, I can use a widget that we call, for example, error codes and document different error types that you have. These are the ones that were generated as a template, but you can always adjust it, add new ones. The same goes for status codes. So I'm going to add here status codes. I can add new ones, let's say 500. Oops. Add additional descriptions.
And this is something I could edit for my organization and reuse throughout my docs, right?
Absolutely. The same goes with if I go to, let's say, one of the APIs, I believe it was this one, right? There are a lot of fields that said ID. And let's say I know that that's a required field. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make it required. So you can adjust it even in Theneo. You don't have to go back to your API spec, especially if you're not feeling that comfortable just yet to make those changes in OpenAPI spec. You can come here in our web editor, make this required. Let's say you have additional properties that you want to define, like a default value or min and max values, anything that you know exactly how your API should behave, and it was not exposed by your engineers based on the script that they were running to generate all of this. You can always adjust it yourself. Also, if you test out your API, you will know better what fields are required, what are the default values. For example, here I see for a lot of Boolean values, example set as false. So maybe it's false is the default value. So I can put all these definitions and actually improve the quality of the documentation. So I already created a version of this before this call. So this is how now my improved documentation looks like, where I have an introduction page. I'm highlighting all the different APIs better. So first time as a user, when I'm coming to this documentation, I see all the APIs, campaigns, contacts, teams, users. I see the status codes, the error codes, and let me switch to dark mode here, error types, and also all the APIs have much better definitions and structured even better. Something also to note here is, for example, with contacts, was it contacts? Yeah, I believe it was. You will see that if we go to the original documentation, I believe it was this one, you see there are so many API requests here. So there are a lot of sections. As a user, this is not really the best experience, because if I'm looking about, let's say, contact email options or APIs, it will be really difficult for me to go through and just navigate and find these APIs. Even though this is how it was tagged or categorized in API spec, I manually adjusted in Theneo, but just simply drag and dropping the section. So for example, if I want to combine these two together, I can make it subsection like this. So what I have done here, I've done the same thing with contacts. I have realized that there are some universal requests here, like update, create for contacts, but then there were specific domains for contacts, like contact notes, document, alerts, email, SMS, and all that. So what I have done is that I have done also in the main section, I have highlighted this information. So when I come to this section, it's much easier for me as a user to see, okay, these are all different APIs also inside the contact. And I can navigate to, let's say, to emails. And now I see contact email and SMS, and they are just specific to this particular section that I'm looking. So all of this, it just creates a better user experience. So the users are more likely to adopt your APIs. Something that sorry, go ahead.
Quick question. As a product manager, am I normally expected to go through all of this? How have you seen it work in practice?
I would say that a lot of times product managers do a better job of constructing a documentation than engineers. The reason why is engineers know their APIs really well, and they'll say, whatever, they'll figure it out. Or this makes sense to me, hence it makes sense to others. But in reality, the first time when you're interacting with someone else's API, or you go to their introduction, whatever, you need to understand what these APIs do. It will not be super easy for you as a third-party developer or third-party user to guess what the APIs are doing. As a product manager, you will look at it from the user experience, from developer experience, and you will understand better how to create a better product. So I will look at the documentation as a product. So think of it, how can I make sure this fits into my use cases? And how can I make sure that my users are able to adopt my API better by creating a better developer experience, hence better API documentation.
I like that. The documentation is the product, is part of the product. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And for those public-facing APIs where you are selling your APIs, it's your marketing tool. It's not just a product also, it's a marketing tool. That's why a lot of small details make huge difference. Again, like we talked about why every field should have descriptions. Here, if I ask AI question earlier, asked a question, I got response from OpenAI in this case, right? The more descriptions I have, more use cases I'm covering, the better AI is going to help the users. And the reality also is that we are getting so used to this ChatGPT, to different tools. We want to find answers right away without having to read all the documentation, without having to find the content. So that's why the better structured your documentation is, better AI is going to respond. And also for users, it will be much easier to explore and see how they can use and leverage your API best.
You mentioned the users can ask questions of the documentation. Are you able to show that?
Yeah. So what was I don't know a lot how this works in terms of the API spec itself. Let's say, how do I update contacts? How do I update contacts
That's cool.
ID? Hopefully that's one of the APIs. I don't know, to be honest, a lot about this API spec that I have imported, but I think it's there. There you go. So in real time, like you would do with ChatGPT, you are getting a response. And it can be from technical question to non-technical question, as long as there is a reference about this in the documentation. We do our own calculation to assess what the user is asking about, and then we'll send that information to OpenAI. For information, we do not send the entire documentation, just very small context. We do our own calculation in the backend. And then if you want to, you can explore, go to that section, and find more information in the documentation, or keep asking questions and getting response from ChatGPT.
That's super cool. It's something I haven't seen, but it makes sense now that you show it to us. Um, okay, I guess
And,
just before we wrap up the demo in a few minutes, I
mhm,
I really want to know a little bit about, you mentioned there's differing quality of OpenAPI documents that you could get.
mhm.
How does the product manager deal with that? Can the product manager somehow fix the OpenAPI doc? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so now that I have made a lot of these manual changes, let's say you've adjusted all of these things in Theneo, and you need to make sure now moving forward, you have a better quality OpenAPI spec. What you can do is you can use our CLI tool, and you can run exporting. So we have this thing where, I don't know if you can see well here. Let me see if I can zoom in. You will just simply run a command called Theneo export OpenAPI. Select which project you want to export, and you will have an OpenAPI spec. So you will have the good quality that fixes, if you remember, we started off with this horrible API spec. Now we went over, we've categorized it better, we added additional content, we had added additional descriptions, we made things required, additional properties, all these things. Well, now I can export it and have that good quality OpenAPI spec that obviously then I can reuse it, because every time there are updates, I can then manually deploy it, or I can automate that process, share it back with my engineering team, or use it with other tools. It doesn't matter, but you will have the better quality API spec. Also, if we have time, I want to very quickly cover why you want to also concentrate on dev portals. That's kind of like part of our product offering as well, but only if we have time, just maybe
Yeah,
2 minutes.
go for it.
Okay.
Let's go for another couple of minutes for sure.
Okay.
I think having the whole dev portal is important. It's not just about the docs.
Yeah, so especially if you have a lot of content and a lot of APIs, you also want to make sure that you are bringing all the content in one place, and it's easier for users to find exactly what they're looking for. That could be, getting started, or API catalog. So in Theneo, we have different templates that we offer. I will share the link with you. And you can filter by industry or by product. There are a lot of options available here. You'll see a lot of different type of designs. You can select whatever design is relevant for you. Very, very simple. Select, let's say I want this template here. I'm gonna add random name here, but please do use a better name. And you will see that we have this low code, no code type of platform where you can even add your marketing team, make changes, deploy it, and have, let's say, something like this. This is an example from our client Everlink. They have dev portal. So every time they're publishing their APIs, it gets categorized. The users can interact based on the type of APIs they're interested and explore it, or have something as simple as Rimsey has, which they're just showcasing all the relevant modules that are relevant to their users. And then also, if you're authorized, you see additional content, or have something like PayMob has for each region that they're operating. They have different dev portals, which all of them have been generated in Theneo. So there are a lot of different examples. You can feel free to explore this page and see which designs are relevant for you or which use cases. And then you can bring all the content from user guides to API docs in just in one place.
All right, that's fantastic. So I don't know if people on the call had an opportunity to maybe go play around with it and generate some documentation. Hopefully, you've had the opportunity, or you can do it offline later. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of next steps you can take. Where do you go from here? So let me reshare my screen real quick
Yeah.
here. Hopefully you all see my screen again. And here's some key takeaways, I think. You can start with a valid, high quality open API, and then you'll get really good results. But along the way, even if you don't have that, I think, and this was kind of new to me here, I think there's tools, there's things in Theneo that hopefully let you improve your open API, improve things, even if it's not top notch. So I was kind of used to that. Oh, my open API has to be perfect, and then we generate the docs. But I'm glad to see that there's alternatives. Getting up and running quickly is great as a product manager because you can start to get feedback, internal feedback, stakeholder feedback, users, developers, customers. Get the feedback, and if you have a tool that, as Anna showed, people can go in, your whole team can go in as tech writers, as engineers, as whomever, and change things, then you can actually implement that feedback really quickly. Keep the human in the loop. Absolutely. Let the AI generate, like, template things out for you, scaffold things for you, so you don't have to do it manually. But keep the human in the loop and make everything actually usable, and inject that humanness in your documentation. And then, once you have the docs out there, you can start making tweaks about look and feel. We didn't see much about that, but there's customization you can do. Some of the templates had like really pretty graphics and so on, but do the documentation, the core documentation first, and then go back and tweak. Um, keep soliciting feedback, even when your docs are in production. Talk to customers, talk to users, get their feedback. And finally, as an individual contributor PM, you're way more empowered than you think now with these tools and AI. And that goes also for engineers and designers and tech writers and architects. And I do feel that all of those personas are kind of like merging, or converging into one kind of builder persona where they're empowered to do everything. I didn't used to be able to write the docs as a product manager, but hey, now I can. So I think that's fantastic. So next steps. Um, Sign up for Theneo or other API documentation tools if you haven't, and try out your own Open API. Where does the Open API come from? Well, it could come from your engineering team. It could have issues, as we saw. You could use AI to generate it. I have a lesson that's linked here that shows how to do that. Or you can use a visual editor to actually go and create request responses and then spit out an open API. Or you can use Theneo to modify what you have there in your docs, and it will actually, as we saw with the CLI, generate open API. And then publish and get feedback. I can't keep overstating that. Uh, and then if you're interested in the topic, you can learn a lot more. I do all these free lessons. One of these lessons is the lessons that we did today. Go over to my page, actually. So these are all the free lessons that are coming up. You'll see lessons about code gen, about MCP. I don't know if you've heard of MCP, but it's like a really important thing right now, and previous lessons that exist, and we've done in the past. One of those lessons is how to build that prototype or that open API from a model in minutes. So you could, go look at that, generate open API, come back to Theneo, scaffold your documentation. I also have a couple of courses, one for product managers that haven't shipped an API, another one for experienced API product managers. We'll highlight this one really quick here. You can scan these QR codes. There's a course coming up on June 5. There's 6 live sessions of 3 hours and an AI project that we'll do at the end. And you also get a one-on-one hour with me to use for consulting, career, whatever you want. We'll have some very interesting guest speakers from industry. And just for people on this live call, we have a code for the first 10 signups to receive $250 off. The code is API Docs. Scan the QR codes. You can get that. I expect that to go soon, within maybe 24 hours. If you're on the recording after that, use the code Theneo for $150. We only have 10 spots for the $250 off. So ask me questions about the course or email Maven if you want to do, more than one seat for your company. And just last but not least here, and very related to what Ana was talking about, there is a big opportunity for API product managers. So first of all, there's only few of us. We're rare. We're only 5% of the total of product managers. API and platform product managers are only 5%. But APIs are important, as we all know. And the stats say that more traffic comes from APIs on the internet than from any other thing. It was 57% a couple of years ago. It's actually rising now. And last but not least, there's potential for API product managers and platform PMs to get paid more because of the specialization. So do take that into account and consider how you might become an API product manager. And with that, let's go to Q&A. Love to have your questions for Ana. We have some questions in the chat. Let me start with the first one. How do I do this at the enterprise level? And I'm not sure if Rohit is asking, is there like an enterprise level for this product, an enterprise process, or an enterprise model from OpenAI that I can use? Ana, you want to say a few things about
Yeah,
that?
I would say that just in general, what we have seen with our enterprise clients is with enterprise, just in general, there are just more complex use cases, and we customize it even more of how they're automating the process. There are so many different personas that are usually getting involved with enterprises, and also depends on the category of the enterprises, which industry they are at. For example, with some of the banking industries, we have seen now, rarely, but we see now API product managers. We are seeing engineers and different type of engineers that are getting involved in the documentation process. On Theneo side, in terms of the offering that we have with Theneo Enterprise option, we have self-hosting option and things like that, which are more important in terms of the security and compliances. We work with banks to very large organizations, which tend to collaborate slightly different, and that's where we are able to customize. Also, there was a question about customization in general. I would say that's very important. Once you are done with the initial draft of your documentation, do customize the way how your documentations look. We have a lot of different templates. You have custom CSS, custom JavaScript, branding configuration. You can feed your own branding as well. And I keep saying that APIs have their own personality, similar to people and companies. So it's very important that you provide the personality and you do not take just the template as it is. So I would recommend going that way and looking. We have this feedback loop where your users can leave the feedback. You can also see what users are asking. Look at that information. Look at how your users are interacting with the documentation so you can make better product decisions for your documentation.
Yeah, definitely part of the product management aspect. Here's a really good question that I also had in my mind. What are the privacy or IP concerns when, I know my documentation is getting fed into OpenAI? What's the catch, or what's the solution there?
So something to note is, doesn't matter which AI product you're talking in Theneo, AI search or content generation, We are not feeding your entire API spec, and we are not feeding your entire documentation to OpenAI. First of all, it will not be effective whatsoever. So what we do is we do our own calculation where we are trying to assess what information to send to OpenAI. And then based on that very smaller information, not the whole picture about API, then it returns the responses. Now, because we are leveraging OpenAI's API and we have partnership with them, that data is not being used for training purposes. Legally speaking, they are not allowed to do that. So none of the data will ever end up into ChatGPT. Having said that, if you're not comfortable with OpenAI and if you want to use other models, that's something that we are able to also customize it more on the enterprise level. We have customers that have their own models. We are easily able to just change the model because the way we calculate that doesn't change. It just we send it to a different AI model, which for us it makes no difference. But I would say some models outperform in terms of the performance and the quality of the documentation.
Definitely. And I would also say that this could be a concern for private APIs, of course, internal APIs.
Yes.
I would say if you're talking about external APIs, this is going to end up being public, and you should also be exposing your OpenAPI document for people to be able to reuse. So that wouldn't be such a huge concern. So another really good question here that's kind of near and dear to me. Uh, can I integrate into my Git flow? Can I integrate, for example, with GitHub so that changes I make in documentation end up reflecting somewhere in my repository?
Absolutely. And that's very important aspect. One thing is to finish working on your documentation. Second is what we always recommend is try to automate that. So work with your engineering team to first, if you want to export the OpenAPI spec that we have generated a better version, share that with your engineering team so that that can be part of your code repository and then automate that, right? So let's say they have updated and added new API endpoints, new fields, etc. If you depend on human a lot of times, then that becomes outdated. So that's why we recommend to automate that step. And we have a lot of tools in place for that, from GitHub integration to our own CLI tool to SDK tools to Visual Studio Code extension that we have. Basically, we have a lot of tools available. So there is no excuse why that steps should not be automated and why your documentation should not stay up to date. That's the end goal, that you should not have to interact a lot, maybe very minimal changes just so that you preview and actually approve that that should be published to, let's say, if you're exposing that API, we do recommend that please review your changes before you are.
As a pull request.
Yeah. Or pull request or even in Theneo, doesn't matter, but please do review it. But you have all these options available. If you don't want to review it, that's your choice to make. You can automatically deploy it. I'll share, or you can find it in the platform. There is an icon for documentation. So that's our own user guides. There is an option for GitHub Actions, CLI, and all this Bitbucket integration and all others. So please have a look at it, especially with CLI. There are a lot of options available there, so you can automate the entire process.
We'll put that in the email that goes out tomorrow as a link for people to go and try out. And I think, fitting into the entire API lifecycle and workflow is super important. So all of this, you absolutely have to automate and make it fit in with CI/CD, with your automated testing, with your deployment process, and with everything you do. Otherwise, it becomes unsustainable and error prone. And also fit it in with the entire process. How do you design APIs? Which brings me to the next question. Again, very relevant. Ferris is saying, hey, a big part of what we do is workflow diagrams, hierarchy diagrams. Are these compatible? Are these something that we can fit into Theneo?
Depends on what the diagrams are and how they're structured. A lot of times, if we have integration with the diagram providers, or if it's just markdown or images, it should be able to fit into that. also depends if it's part of the API spec or if you want to put it in the user guides. In general, a lot of our clients also include diagrams, but I'll not be able to respond if I don't know exactly what diagrams or how it is structured. The best way is to give it a try and see how it responds. And if you don't know how to, also there is a chat box in Theneo, so you can ask a question. Our support engineer will be able to respond in 2 minutes.
Yeah, and I'd say that anything that is valid markdown, like Anna said, if it's a link, if it's some formatting, if it's something you can embed in Markdown, if it works in Markdown, it's going to work in Open API because all the descriptions in Open API are support Markdown. So kind of something to think about there. And then last but not least, by Jack, hey, I have a style guide for all my APIs. Can I somehow feed it in so that, my documentation aligns with the style guide and there's no inconsistencies?
Absolutely. We have a specific page called branding. So you go there and you can feed your branding style. I can very quickly share. So from colors that you have, main colors both in light and dark mode, because for engineers, you will see that they love dark mode. But you want to have both configured. You can feed your like hex colors in terms of the colors. For each element that you'll see, there is a configuration for all of them, but also you have additional custom CSS and custom JavaScript. So you can exactly customize however you want to branding for the documentations. And for Dev Portal, we have custom CSS or entirely CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. You can adjust it manually in our no-code platform or export the code if you're comfortable with making those tweaks and import it back. Either way, what we always say, yes, please do personalize so that it doesn't look like Theneo's documentation, but it looks like something that is part of your product.
Do you have Theneo branding in there, or can people remove it?
Yeah, by default, it's Theneo's branding, but please do remove it.
Okay, and this is about the style guide or the design language and your branding and so on. I think if people hearing style guide and APIs think about my API guidelines and style guide, that would be more of a question of can I feed it somewhere within the OpenAPI generation process and lint
Yeah.
it for quality. That's something that happens within the API design process. Again, if you go look at one of the past lessons where we're generating OpenAPI with a model with LLM, we actually feed standards and you can actually feed a style guides and your entire PDF or link or whatever you have, and it will follow that. Anna?
I'll also add on that is we do have an API governance CLI tool, so you can also put it in part of your CI/CD pipelines. But that happens when you're working with API spec and you want to deploy in Theneo. That's not something that kind of you manually adjust it in the platform, but it's something that you make it part of your automation.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all of these kind of special features, we'll include links in the email tomorrow. Any other questions, observations about documentation, AI, and so on from the group? All right. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for attending, and thank you, Anna. Anything else to say? Where can people come find you, comment, connect with you?
Feel free to add me on LinkedIn, and we value feedback a lot. So hopefully you give it a try to Theneo and you experiment with bad or good API spec, and just let me know what your feedback is, how we can make it more comfortable for you as well, because our goal is that Theneo should be for everyone. And hopefully it is, but would love to get your feedback. And more than anything, I'm so excited that more people are getting involved in API space.
Yeah, absolutely. Same. It's been a passion of mine for years and years. So it's great to see, and it's great to see product managers, getting active in this space. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. watch the recording, and please wait for that email with details. And hope to see you at one of our next lessons here. Thank you, Anna, and thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.